Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here, in the space between the turns of your favorite games. I'm Pete Wissinger.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And in today's episode, we're talking all about trick-taking games specifically. It's a What We Talk About episode where we're diving deep on the decision space of trick-taking games. And this is a broad category of games that existed for something like 600 years. So we're not biting off more than we can chew. We're going to be able to do this in an hour or so. But we're so excited to be joined once again, by Pete Wissinger, who is our ace in the hole. Wait, no, that's a poker reference. Our Trump suit?
Yes, I'll be the
Can
Trump.
You be our Trump card?
Right. I'll be the Trump
Okay.
for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I am known in all of my gaming circles as the trick-taking guy. So even though, like you said, Brendan, these games have been around for hundreds of years, literally, we're obviously in the trick-taking renaissance right now. And so this makes it a timely episode as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that in some ways, trick-taking games are among the oldest card games that it's seemingly that people play, right? That are still games that we might play. That's maybe not true. There might be other versions, but trick-taking games are older than poker, which is kind of cool to think about. And it's amazing that when I started in the hobby around, I don't know, sort of earnestly 10 years or so ago, there were a few trick-taking games. People talk about games like Tichu, that you had to play sort of these like classic trick-taking games. Chimera was mentioned sometimes.
Yeah.
But there was also among the design community of people who wanted to design board games or card games and have them published, there was this popular wisdom. Yeah, you're not going to get a trick-taking game published though. Like they're pretty cool, but you're not going to get it published. And it's hilarious to me to remember this because so many people could say that's just preposterous at this point, right? There's hundreds of trick-taking games, ostensibly, I would guess, being published every year for the past few years and doing really interesting, innovative things. So we're going to dive deep on some of those really cool, interesting, innovative things. If you've never heard of a trick-taking game, we're going to start the episode by defining them and talking about their history a little bit, and then also just explore what makes trick-taking games unique. Why are these games hooking us as players, and what types of decisions do they offer?
And before we get into that, can I be really vulnerable with you guys for a second?
Yes, it's trick-taking.
Okay.
You have to be.
This is a safe space, Jake.
Okay, because this is a little bit, this has been on my mind, weighing heavily. In the last 30 days, guess how many reviews of our podcast we've had? It's less than 10. Yeah, it's 0. You just went right there.
Yeah, it's been weighing on me too. I wake up in the morning, I check the reviews.
Last thing I do before I turn off the lights, check the reviews, still 0. So if maybe you're a new listener, please consider giving us a rating or review where we found this podcast. It means a ton to Brendan and I. Okay, let's get on with the show.
So from there, I think it's the perfect time to jump into defining trick-taking games. So we have a rough parameter for what we're talking about. And trick-taking games are broad, but we always like to do this at the start of our What We Talk About episodes. But I think in this case, it's especially important because all the time, I think well-meaning hobbyists like myself describe games as trick-taking games that are not, in fact, trick-taking games and are maybe trick-taking adjacent games like shedding games or climbing games that we're not talking about today. So what is a trick-taking game? I can kick us off and start with so I think the most important thing is that games are structured around finite rounds in which you are competing to win or lose those finite rounds. So each player will play a card or typically a card to put as an input into a trick. And the winner of that trick that everyone plays a card into matters in some way, shape, or form, right? So it's not maybe a shedding game where you all take turns playing cards and the first person to play all their cards in turn, something happens, right? Maybe you want to be the first to go out in a shedding game or the last. But no, in trick-taking games, I think fundamentally the most important thing is that the game is separated into tricks.
Yeah, I like that. How about let's just go with that definition there. A trick-taking game, you're trying to like win or lose tricks. It's so funny how as soon as you start like going into what that is, it just gets incredibly complicated. But I think it's safe to assume that most people listening to this podcast are familiar with the concept. And if you're not, Maybe you've played games like Hearts or Spades at your dining room table growing up. And probably if you still have no idea what we're talking about after hearing us say a trick taking game is when you're trying to win or lose tricks and what Brendan just said, maybe the best thing to do would take 30 seconds to just like look up a YouTube video showing it to you, because it's just weirdly hard to explain online on audio.
And if you think,
You know,
like Scout, the answer is no, not a trick-taking
yes,
game.
I was going to jump in. So, like, to be the like pedantic one, which I know this is a safe space for pedants, but I think that the difference between a climbing shedding game and a trick taking game is that, okay, so Scout is what you would call a climbing or shedding game. Shedding game typically means that the goal is usually to play all your cards. And what makes it often connected to a climbing game is that you can only play into the contest if you can play something that's better than what's already been played. Whereas in a trick-taking game, you play in no matter what. In a climbing game, if I can't beat what's on the table, then I don't get to play cards out of my hand.
Typically, you have to draw as a penalty.
Possibly, yeah. Many people are familiar with, I always say, shedding games, you've all played Uno, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uno is a shedding game, right? And so Scout, Tichu, you mentioned at the top, these are climbing shedding games. And I think that for many people, the material difference between this and a trick-taking game is really just not even something that's like worth getting into, because ultimately I think the experience around the table is similar enough that people are like, oh, just call it a trick-taking game.
I would call it a light card game.
I totally agree with that. The actual decision space to invoke the name of our show is going to be really similar between the two styles of game. Almost, and you might find a shedding game and a trick taking game that have like a more similar decision space, like a more similar gameplay flow, a more similar like size and scope of decision space than you would in like two different deck building games that just are like completely different animals.
Let's get out of the weeds and talk about the history of trick-taking games briefly before we kind of jump into the feel of trick-taking games and what makes them unique. So interestingly, I did a little bit of research on this, and trick-taking games actually, like a lot of card games, emerged from Asia in the early part of the second millennium. And then there's sort of two key milestones in their evolution. And it seems like the trump suit, which is a key feature that we'll talk about in a little bit. If you don't know what we're talking about, circle back, flag it, put a bookmark in it, emerges in roughly the 15th century in Europe. So that's pretty important in terms of what is a trick-taking game as people think about. I think that's sort of the second thing people often go to when talking about what makes a trick-taking game a trick-taking game. Oftentimes, trump suits are really important. And then in the 17th century, bidding emerges sort of mechanically as another innovation. And that's another really key component that is common or not common, but sort of the conditions of victory are something that's played with in trick-taking games often, and bidding is an example of a mechanic to do just that, right? How do we make it fair when all the cards are dealt at the beginning and hands might not be evenly balanced?
Yeah.
It's kind of trying to solve that problem.
I love those two benchmarks, because if you're thinking about like designing a trick-taking game or what you might like or not like in a trick-taking game, often those are like the two big levers that people play with. And if you're learning trick-taking game, somebody might be like, okay, this is trump, this is how you bid. And it's like you're basically can play the game
play a
from there
trick-taking
a lot.
game.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the oldest trick-taking game I've played is French Tarot. And
Okay.
the tarot deck originated as a playing card deck that was used to play a trick-taking game. And it's like a regular deck of cards like we have, but then it has a fifth suit with 21 cards in it. That's just the trump suit. And
Dang,
so,
that's so
yeah.
cool. Are there any
Yeah.
modern board games that use a tarot deck? Like
I'm
sure.
I mean, there are some modern kind of like indie games that use French tarot decks.
Okay, cool.
My favorite one is one called Le Plateau, which has a board that you use for your bid, which has all the different cards in the deck on it. And you say, like, you bid on what kind of pattern you can make by the cards you collect in your tricks. It's super weird.
Wow.
But
it's like
yeah.
Mahjong mixed with, or poker mixed with.
It's strange.
Trick-taking. Cool.
All right, back to the history.
The other sort of point we wanted to hit on here too is just the regional nature of trick-taking games, which is kind of this cool feature of this broad genre of games. So in our Discord, we were talking about trick-taking games, and Bart one of our frequent listeners and Decision Space Jam participants, mentioned, he sort of said, everyone in the Netherlands plays Klaverjas, which is a trick-taking game that I've never heard of. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Have you heard of Spades? And he said, no, before you mentioned it on the podcast, I'd never heard of Spades. And I think that speaks to how regional in nature.
Yeah.
Euchre is another one that gets mentioned. And in our show notes, which patrons have access to, you can see a geek list that has this cool board game geek list of trick-taking games from around the world.
Yeah, I know that in Russia, everyone, or in like the former Soviet bloc, everyone plays a game called Durak.
Which is not a trick-taking game, I don't think.
Oh,
but
I don't know. I think
Durak is another type of trick-taking adjacent game, I believe. Yeah. But it's a shedding game, I think.
Okay.
So we've done it twice now because I said teach you.
Well, and again, I'll go back to the point that
Jake's gonna be like, please stop.
Who cares?
Put down the cards.
We could talk about both, but it's interesting that trick-taking games in particular have such a kind of a regional it's almost like languages and like dialects, right? You like go far enough and you're going to encounter a different slight variation on different trick-taking games, and you can kind of imagine how, American like kind of frontier trick-taking games or whatever might like be more similar to each other than regional trick-taking games in Netherlands or in parts of Asia. I think that's fascinating. And I think probably owes a lot to the fact that these games are typically played with components that a lot of people would just have in the house, right? If you have a deck of cards and you learn one way, it's so easy just to say like, oh, let's change the bidding rule just a tiny bit. Or, what if the two cards, which are typically bad, actually had like this slight bonus, and all of a sudden you've just got a variant going so easily. I think it's really cool.
To me, trick-taking games, so Whist is another really sort of historically important trick-taking game. It was very popular in Victorian sort of parlor game playing. And I think, Jake, the kind of point you're trying to make too is just how trick-taking comes from this era of games where game design was happening organically, right? You'd sort of play the game and then the group might just veer in one direction or another. And it's really, really cool to see the vast array of trick-taking games. I think Card Games Around the World, a really cool book by Sid Saxon that collects card games, has some trick-taking games in it too that are very interesting.
And it's just something about cards and trick-taking games, right? Because we don't see, I know there are variants to chess and checkers, of course, but you don't see the same thing where like, oh, in Massachusetts, everybody plays checkers like this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go over to Michigan, everybody's playing this variant of checkers. It's kind of like it's just checkers everywhere. It actually reminds me of beer pong in a funny way, where like when I was in college in Texas, there was like a really specific way of playing beer pong where you do, if you're not familiar, this is like a dexterity drinking game that involves filling up plastic cups with beer and trying to toss a ping pong ball into a cup on the other side. So where I went to school in Texas, people had, and I think this is just specific to my university in Texas even, instead of having one big triangle of cups stacked 4, 3, 2, 1, you would have two triangles, 3, 2, 1 on either side of your table and one cup in the middle. And if you made a ping pong ball into the cup in the middle, then you could combine the two remaining triangles into one central structure.
Wow. Like a shoot the moon mechanism.
Yeah, pretty much. Like really convoluted beer pong. And then, but there, there's all kinds of house rules to beer pong. Like it isn't played the same way in two different houses, it almost feels like.
I will say what's fun about talking about trick-taking games compared to a lot of the stuff you guys talk about in this podcast is that these are not just like games that gamers play, right? Like I think about like my grandparents playing bridge or pinochle or something, right? That like there's something about this mechanic that really does transcend like hobby gaming. And I think it's really cool to see modern hobby gamers and designers embracing that, like, oh, like there's really something to chew on here, that these games that you imagine like old people going to bridge club to play, that like that's actually sometimes just as fun as busting out like a heavy board game or whatever.
So why do you think that is? And I know you have thoughts on this, Pete.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, like, do you all think of trick-taking games as fillers?
It's a great question. I think it's contextual, right? I think my thinking here, Pete, is
very political of you.
That there's a, well, I think that there's a amazing rules density to complexity level in terms of interesting emergent decisions and create the sort of things that you can learn quickly and also things that take a long time to learn in playing trick-taking games that make them easy to use in a hobby setting where you might throw a filler game on the table and quickly play it, but also make them interesting enough that you could spend entire afternoons on a holiday with your family playing spades.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm in a trick-taking Discord server, and the overlap of people who are into trick-taking games and into train games is a surprisingly large overlap. And there's something I think that for heavy gamers where the puzzle of playing a hand in a trick-taking game, I think, and the interaction of playing a hand of trick-taking game kind of tickles people's brains in a similar way because it's the opposite of a heads down game. It's like an incredibly interactive experience and you're rewarded for feeling and for like being clever and for outthinking your opponents. And so for me, having a game night where we sit around and play filler games is like, fine. It's not something I would want to do every week. However, I have often wished I had just like a weekly card game night. Because I do think for me, this is a main course, right? It can be anyway.
One thing that you said at the beginning of this podcast, Brendan, that I think is really relevant here and interesting is that, 10 years ago in this hobby, there were very few trick-taking games that were published. Trick-taking games generally weren't considered publishable. And myself coming into the hobby at that time too had no interest in playing trick-taking games. And I think a big part of the reason for that is that they are close to mass market games, right? They're similar to Uno, as has already been invoked on this podcast. They're similar to Hearts or whatever games that your grandparents are playing. And I think when I was first coming into this hobby and being like, wow, board games are not like Monopoly anymore. Like you can find stuff that's like so different from these games that we know. It made me want to steer clear of trick-taking games for the same reason I was like, interested in the hobby because the hobby has games that are different from anything I've experienced before. And now, I'm circling back to them and enjoying them a ton. But I would hazard a guess that the reason that they can be popular amongst people who are not modern board game enthusiasts is because they are familiar.
Yeah, I think that's really intriguing and fair, Jake. I also wonder if part of this too is there's so many games being published now that there's this sort of new critical mass in a way where you can sell a niche product that is trying to sort of say we're hyper focused on this segment of the market that's interested in trick-taking games, which admittedly feels larger and larger every day because I hear about so many trick-taking games being published. But everyone, I feel like whenever you're in a hobby, right, whether it's, I don't know, making wine in your basement or bowling or knitting, there's a degree of self-expression through how do I do this thing, right? What is my own sort of niche in this area? And I think there's an element of trick-taking with that because they're so compact, it's easy to sort of find this like cool indie self-expression of like, I found this cool game that people don't know about, right? To some extent, that seems like to me. And I think that's really cool. I like sort of that sort of cultural thing of like, I found this game Niet that's published in 1997. This is a popular trick-taking game, and it's really cool. I want to share it with people. I don't know. Or there's these really cool Japanese trick-taking games. They're my thing. Lots of other people like these type of games, but I like these type of games. I don't know. Am I underselling trick-taking games by talking about self-expression?
For people who value novelty, it is like the most like. And I also think that they excite the brains of designers because they'll show you something familiar and like, hey, look at this little trick this designer came up with. And you're like, God, that's so good, right? Like you're like, oh, that is so smart. They just did that one little thing and it's absolutely brilliant. And it just excites like it's almost like the more of them you play and develop a taste for them, the more sort of exciting it is when you find one that does a little thing that is just changes everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of invoke murder mystery books. It's something I'm really enthusiastic about. Like I love Agatha Christie. I love the whodunit. I love the closed room, locked room murder mysteries. And I'm hearing similarities in this trick-taking game discussion to that, where why these books are so interesting and fun to me is because like I am familiar with the rhythm, the routine, the structure. So it's like the one little twist that, you know, can make something so familiar to me feel so new. And I would imagine there's some similarity there to people who get really down the rabbit hole into the trick taking game. I think it's very similar to what Pete was describing.
Yeah, and it's like that for, I think, people who are really into like 18xx games.
Mm-hmm.
Where like if I play 18xx games, I know how an 18xx works. So when I play a new
brag,
one,
but whatever.
I've literally never played an 18xx game.
Yes, one of us.
But it's the kind of thing where I think those players, when they play a new one, they are like, oh, this is so cool because it does this differently, right?
Right.
Like you said, what's the twist? And I think that's where we are with the trick-taking segment of the hobby right now.
Totally.
And you have the benefit of this shared language of trick-taking games, right? You talked about this, Pete. You can teach the game, or Jake, maybe you mentioned this. You can teach the game by sort of saying, this is the twist. Now you play a trick-taking game as you'd expect. And there's a huge benefit to that when we're there, sort of, as Jeff Engelstein, sort of designer, podcaster, game ludologist, describes it, the original sin of board games is learning rules. In trick-taking games, there's fewer rules you have to learn if you know how to play trick-taking games already.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an incentive to keep playing them. Because if they delight you and excite you, and you already mostly know how to play, you don't have to do the part of games that is arguably the least enjoyable.
One thing I've seen in some trick-taking game rule books recently is, you know, if it's like a 6-page rule book, and it's like, if you know what a trick-taking game is, you can just skip to page 4.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. More games should do that. I love that. Should we sort of delve into now?
It's time. The decision space.
Yes. Why are these games interesting, and why are they different than other card games?
So are we starting here with like the key elements of trick-taking games? Like, are we skipping this?
So it's funny, the first note here, the first thing I will ask if I'm sitting down to play a trick-taking game, I will say, is this a standard, like, must-follow trick-taking game, right? Like, that's like the first piece of information that for people who know trick-taking games, they're like, I'm in.
So what is it? What's a must-follow trick-taking game, Pete?
Great. So I when I think of, because we say trick-taking game with a twist, well, we should know what a standard one is before we add twists, right? And I think the standard rule for trick-taking games is that there is a leader of the trick, which would
everyone's dealt a hand of cards.
Everyone's dealt a hand, so you get a hand of cards, and then someone leads the first trick, where they pick any card from their hand and put it on the table. And then everyone else must follow that leader. The typical rule is that you must play a card of the same suit as the leader. So that narrows your decision space in your hand. You know, maybe I only have one card in that suit, right? And then
usually the high value wins.
Absolutely. Now, if you don't have a card of that suit, then usually you can play any card you want. If you play off suit, it's usually the highest card of the led suit that wins. However, in a lot of games, there is a trump suit. So it will be the highest trump card that wins. And if there's no trump card, then it's the highest card of the led suit. And then whoever wins that collects the card, makes a trick, and then they lead the next one, and that proceeds until you play out the whole hand.
Great, well done. We've explained trick-taking games for a second time on this podcast, but
the suit restriction is, I think, the core element. Yeah,
and I'm going to take a stab at talking about some of the interesting decision implications that follows from that must-follow aspect. So, which is basically this, right? If I have to follow Pete's blue card and I'm looking at a hand of 3 blue cards, right? There might be a little element of uncertainty about, you know, do I want to just use my highest blue card in the hopes that I'm going to win now? So that could be like a risk-taking element where I'm not sure if somebody fall after me is going to have a higher blue card to play to win the trick, assuming I'm trying to win the trick. So I think that's like one small element of the decision space there, when it's like, which of these cards on suit do I play? Typically, things could get even more interesting when you're playing off suit, because then even if you're not eligible to win the trick, maybe you don't have a trump card, maybe you don't want to use your trump card, that's when you can, I think a lot of the decision space is around like shaping your hand for future plays. Do I want to get rid of a high card so that I win fewer suits? That might be relevant to, or win fewer tricks. That might be relevant to winning a bid. If I bid a low number of cards, that could be a great opportunity to throw away something really high now when it can't win. Or am I trying to run out of a certain color of cards that might give me, the ability to play offsuit again in the future easier? So I think that is some of the decision space that stems from must follow rules in trick taking games.
Absolutely.
Sort of two things. One, Jake, you almost just touched on like a common heuristic of trick taking games that we'll get into and talk about it a lot, which is trying to
jump the gun.
No, this is great. Trying to void yourself in a hand.
Like
where you want to not have a certain suit in your hand. But I think what my thinking on following suit and why it's so interesting and essential is two things. One, it makes each hand of cards you're dealt feel like this unique puzzle to solve. You can sit there and you can think, okay, how would I ideally like to play this out? And you won't get to do that because trick-taking games are all about being forced by other people to do things you probably wouldn't ideally do in the order you would like, because you don't always have a say over what you play when, because you have to follow suit. But also, a lot of times following suit as a mechanism, I think makes for these really interestingly paced games around hands of cards, where you have these sort of this flow of information where it sort of trickles out and players are getting information. You get this rush of information where you see your hand and you have a sense for what other players' hands are going to be like. But then as trick after trick is played, you get slowly this trickle of information, and then you have really exciting moments where all of a sudden there's a reveal, and it turns out Pete doesn't have this suit in his hand really early, and he gets to be a total just cheater and play this other card and win the trick. But at the same time, Jake also is void on the very same turn and gets to play a higher trump card of the sort of suit. And you have these really theatric moments, I think, and that's why, for me, trick-taking games, that's where a lot of the magic is there's this structured forced play of I'm bringing in information, and then it leads to these climactic reveals that are frankly exciting. It's fun to throw down a card that surprises everyone.
Yeah.
Everybody's like,
Trumping
you have to follow. And you're like, oh, I know.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. And then like sometimes you're looking at a hammer, you're like, oh, sweet, I'm going to win like 3 tricks because I've got like 3 high diamonds. And then like I play that ace of diamonds and then someone's like, trump. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? You've absolutely ruined me. I pitched a trick-taking design once to a publisher, and they said, I don't like trick-taking games because they make me play a card even if I don't want to. And I get that, right? I think that in general, it feels bad in games to be like, but I don't want to play that card. And it can make like bad deals feel bad. Or if you're like, oh, I just got dealt bad cards, and it can make the whole thing feel random and out of your control.
Yeah, I think that's something we have to contend with in trick-taking game, where the decision space is much smaller on a turn-to-turn basis, or even a game-to-game basis, than basically any other type of game that we talk about on this podcast. You might have a whole round of the game where you have very little agency or almost no agency at all, right? Like you're just have a bad hand, no real opportunities to ever win a trick, so no real opportunities to ever lead and change things, and you're just the hand is literally playing itself. And I think that's something that is tolerable to people who enjoy trick-taking games because these games are quick. You play many rounds, so any random variance within a round is kind of going to be a wash by the end of the game. And usually, after many repeated rounds and many repeated plays of the game, you'll start to see skill kind of paying off, and you'll see yourself improving at the game, and that's all well and good. But that is just a fact of life in a lot of trick-taking games, that there are lots of, and even if the whole round doesn't give you very little agency. Almost every round will have some element of that, especially when you get to the end of your hand. You have 2 or 3 cards left. You might be done making decisions for that round because somebody plays diamonds, so you play your last diamond. Somebody plays clubs, you play your last club. Somebody plays hearts, you play your last heart. And then everybody just throws in their last card in the last round.
You're totally right. And I think for me, when I play a trick-taking game, the biggest determining factor for me as to whether I think it's a good design or not is, did I feel like my hand played itself, right? Like, did I feel like I made decisions as we were playing? Which is why I think that like the incentive structure totally makes the game when it comes to a trick-taking game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, which is why I love games like Fox in the Forest, or games like Jekyll versus Hyde, which I can talk about more later. But something I love about the Fox in the Forest is it's a trick-taking game where when you're first out your hand, you're trying to decide if you want to win lots of tricks or lose lots of tricks. And how you feel about that and is based, you might make an initial decision and then swiftly change your decision and try to pivot away from that really quickly based on what you learn about your opponent's hand. And I think that those can be really interesting. Trick-taking games are all about information, right? You're trying to use the information you have in your initial hand, and then also the quick information you're given to make inferences about other players' hands to play around them. And sort of that being forced to follow suit, like you mentioned, Pete, and how the publisher had sort of said, I don't like it because I'm forced to do things I don't like. To me, it almost feels like trick-taking games can have this really rhythmic quality to them, almost like a dance with all the other players at the table, right? Where sometimes you're leading, sometimes you're following, but you have to kind of suss out what everyone is trying to do and move in the right direction.
I think this is why the crew works so well and why the crew is so brilliant, because every card played is you giving information to the other players at the table, right? And the crew is this cooperative game with limited communication where you can feel like you're reading the minds of everybody at the table, because every time I play a card, I'm telling you something about my hand. And we have these goals we have to achieve. And only by reading the information from our forced decisions can we thread the needles that the game asks us to thread.
And then I'm sitting there and Pete's like, I'm giving this really valuable information. And I'm like, but I don't speak trick-taking game.
Dude, I've played the crew with people who don't do trick-taking games, and it is people who like play complicated board games. And then I'm like, oh, let's play the crew. And then I first have to explain to them how a trick-taking game works. And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be
Let's
a
play
struggle.
Spades.
Being the worst player in a game of the crew is so stressful. I mean, it's just
everyone's just staring at you like,
yeah.
Imagine being the worst player in a game of the
And then you play a
Fox and
card
Forest.
and everybody just puts their head in their hands. So like, how could that be the case, Jake?
It's like being the worst player at the Fox and Forest duet, which is the cooperative Fox and the Forest version, except it's always me. I'm always the worst player because my wife Maya loves trick-taking games.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, right? Where you're using what cards you play to communicate. She's like, you've done it again. You understand nothing about this game. And I think that it's cooperative trick-taking games. We might talk about this a little bit more later. I think are one of the real modern innovations of trick-taking games, right? That and maybe special powers. But could we talk about being short-suited again? Jake, you kind of like stuck your head into it, but I want to talk about it more.
I just blew right by it.
It's one of the best feelings in a trick-taking game, I think.
Yeah.
Because
and what do we mean by
all
it?
of a sudden, it means that the suit that people are playing, I don't have. So I can play any card. And it almost feels like I've been freed, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole game, they've been telling me I have to play certain cards. Now all of a sudden the game is saying, play whatever you want. And so in a game like Spades, it's really great because now I'm free to play trump cards. And I'm free to make the choice about, do I want to try and win or lose tricks? And then in a game like Hearts, where you're trying to lose tricks, it feels amazing because I'm like, you want to feed me tricks? You can't feed me tricks. I don't have any suits. And so I think it gives you these feelings of agency after you've felt before so constrained by the game.
It's like getting a power up in Mario. For sure. Yeah. All of a sudden you're running the table. It feels amazing. And then until someone else gets another power up, and then you're on even footing again and you have to carve out new space. Do you think that that's a good heuristic for playing trick-taking games? For the most part, usually when you go in, you can, if it's a trick-taking game with a trump suit and following, oftentimes you're trying to play your hand such that you can short suit yourself quickly.
I think it's just a heuristic in every board game ever where like more choices is better than less choices.
Sure, but it's
Yeah.
But
contextual.
no, I
But
think
yeah,
that you're right that in general, being short at least one suit is almost always to your advantage in a trick taking game. And because, it would be I think a bad game design decision if you play a trick taking game where it's just like win tricks. Whoever wins the most tricks wins. Because that's the sort of thing where I don't have agency.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that being short suited is going to feel differently depending on what the game's telling you to do.
sure. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, good luck in my game I just invented called If You Can't Play on Suit, You Lose.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got some other things on the notes here, but like one other thing I think is just kind of interesting to think about for the decision space that exists in trick take games is like strategy around leading and like what cards you lead with. Because sometimes you play a game of spades or whatever, and it feels awesome when you have like, oh, I've got ace, king, queen of hearts. So I could just, pop that down in order and nobody's going to be able to beat me. And I can just like almost, guarantee myself those tricks unless somebody's short suited, of course, as we just talked about. But then there are times when, once, and so usually I think, and I'll just say in spades in particular, and I'm not an expert, like it can be really good to start with trying to like do a run of tricks early. But then towards the mid game, once you start getting a sense that people might be getting close to short suited, then you might want to put down a card to like lose intentionally so that you can get better order in the round, right? Where you can be the one to jump in and trump in to win a trick, right? Because if you're the last person to go in the round, you have the most information. You might have the choice to guarantee yourself a win of the trick or not. So it's kind of great to be the last person to play in a trick taking game as well.
I call that seat the hammer.
The
The
hammer.
last person when it goes around the hammer, because that is the person who plays with the most information, right?
Yeah.
When you lead, you don't know what other people are going to play. And so in a game where you're incentivized to lose,
But you have the most
tricks,
power. You have the most
yes,
control of how the shape of the hand.
I find that in a game where you're incentivized to lose tricks, nothing feels worse than leading. Like, it's excruciating to lead when you're trying to lose a trick because you're like, I'm throwing this out there and I have no control over whether or not I actually win this trick.
You know the videos on the internet of the people who are serving ice cream, but they're moving the ice cream all around on a stick.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like put it on the cone and then pull it back. That's playing a trick taking game when you're trying to lose and you go first. You're just always the fool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like perpetually. Sure. Like, oh, you broke my ankles this way and that way and over my head. Yeah. I think trick taking games have these really exciting moments of, for me, raw sort of emotional experience, and it's because of the sort of what I had talked about earlier with that pacing and the reveal. But these games can also pivot. You have this real, for such a short game, right? You deal out a hand of cards. Usually, say it's a 52 card deck, so maybe each of you get, I don't know, right, a small hand of cards, and then from there you have almost a beginning, middle, and end, a whole arc in that hand of cards as they're played out, and you learn about what suits are going to be strong, what suits are going to be weak. Maybe the trump suit is set in a game like Spades, so you have that information, but then it's, when does that become relevant within this arc? And each arc is similar, but it can feel unique depending on when that is, right? If Jake's dealt a hand with no hearts to start, that round of Spades is going to feel really differently than if all the hearts are equally distributed, all the diamonds are equally distributed, right, and all the clubs are equally distributed.
Yeah.
Should we talk about bidding?
Why are you so sad, Jake?
I love bidding. I don't know about you guys. I've talked to people who are really into trick taking games, and they've said that bidding is the hardest thing for new people because you give them a hand of cards and they're like, hey, predict how many tricks you're going to win.
Yeah.
And it can be a real barrier. But I think that it's really important because it does away with the problem I mentioned earlier of being dealt a bad hand. Because the thing about bidding is that there's no such thing as a good or bad hand. The important thing is, can you evaluate how good or bad your hand is? And so typically the way bidding works is you have to say, before you start playing, after being dealt, I think I'm going to win this many tricks. And usually this is a public declaration. Sometimes you take turns bidding, or in a game like Skull King, everyone reveals their bid simultaneously, which is hilarious, right? It's the by far the most hilarious part of Skull King.
And it's hilarious because normally there's a set number of tricks, right? Maybe
Correct.
there's 11 tricks. So if Pete's bidding that he's going to win 8 tricks, he has a banger hand, and I'm not going to bid anywhere close to 7. But in Skull King or Wizard, a game that's very similar to it, right? Maybe you all reveal and you say you're all going to win 7, but you're only playing 10 tricks, right? And that's hilarious because you're all dumb.
It is. It's so funny, but I think bidding can be difficult for new people. However, it makes for very exciting hands of cards because all of you get to a point in the hand where you're like on like the cliff's edge, where you're like, I did it, and now I am just trying to like dodge tricks everywhere, where it just, and everyone's
because you're on the edge of a cliff. Right?
And
that's the feeling.
And everyone's incentives at the table are obvious.
Like your car's front wheels are like off.
100%.
You're dangling.
And so it gives players who are very skilled an advantage, which I know that, on Decision Space, you guys like games where skilled players, can do something with that skill.
Like challengers.
Challengers, exactly. Imagine if in challengers, right, you had to bid on like at how many cards it would take for you to win, right? Like that's
right. Yeah, but to your point earlier, right, where you evaluate how good a trick-taking game is or whatever, like if there's bidding in it, then you have agency. It ticks that box. Like you can't, even if you never get to make a decision that whole round because you're just forced to play cards, you can't say that you had no agency in the round because hopefully in that case you bid nil, right? You said I'm not going to win any tricks, and then
which is very fun.
That can feel amazing, right? When otherwise in a normal game where it's trying to win tricks, it would feel really bad.
And this can be really helpful, right, at the beginning of a round of, say, spades, where you're trying to assess your hand strength versus other players' hand strengths, where you might make a decision to play out your hand slightly differently based on your bid, right? So maybe you have, Jake, the situation you were describing earlier, where you had ace, king, queen of clubs. Maybe after the bidding happens, you think, ooh, maybe the best way to play this is actually I need to make sure that some other players win some tricks early on. So you sort of sandbag and you play low value of those clubs early to make sure that other players are going to use their low value clubs to win tricks that you need them to win, so you can hit bid when you play your high value tricks. And that's what trick taking games make you do. They think about how you should play the beginning of the game because you can see what's going to happen in the middle, and if you play the middle wrong, you're going to lose in the end, right? It asks you to take in that whole arc and try to be clever, and sometimes you are, and it feels great.
Well, and it wants you to push as well, because the incentives in a lot of these games are, a lot of times it's like you get a big reward for winning 0, but not much of a reward for winning 1. So it's like if I'm looking at a hand where I think I'm going to win 1, I'm probably going to bid nil, because if I can try and lose the 1 I thought I would win, I'm actually going to be rewarded. And so a lot of people call these like shoot the moon mechanisms, because in hearts, your goal is to not take any hearts unless you take all the hearts, in which case you shot the moon and you actually did the best. And so games where they say, don't do this unless you do it really
perfectly.
Well. Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that element in bidding can be really fun.
Another example might be something like in spades where you're bidding nil. You're going to say, I'm going to win 0 tricks with this hand. I have the worst hand possible. I know my hand's the worst at the table and I'm not going to win any. It can feel a lot like the moment in baseball where someone walks up and they call their shot, right? They point at
For sure.
They point at the outfield at the fence and they say it's going over. And then when you actually make nil, when you successfully don't win any tricks, you do feel like you hit a home run. Like
because everyone's trying to feed you tricks, which is the funny part. Like there's an element to these games with bidding where it almost feels like a take that game, where like I've said this is my goal and everyone else is just trying to screw you over.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily have the bad feelings of a take that game, I think.
And it has a little bit of self-balancing in there too, which is really nice, right? You wouldn't call it like Kingmaking because I think when people talk about kingmaking, generally they're talking about a more like open decision space, right? Where I have a ton of agency over what I'm going to do on my turn. Whereas maybe Pete's got a big lead in this trick taking game and everybody's saying like, kill Pete. We have to like make sure Pete doesn't win his trick. And we can try extra hard to screw Pete over, but we still can't guarantee it. I can't just send all my armies over to his territories, sandbagging my own position. We still have to do this like within the very rigid confines of the game, which I think is what makes it feel fun and rewarding when we actually succeed maybe in knocking Pete down a peg. And for Pete, it doesn't feel as bad as the other example.
I asked Maya why she loves trick-taking games and why Spades is her favorite trick-taking game of all time. And she said, because I get to feel crafty. And I think I was thinking about what she meant a little bit more throughout the day. And in listening to this conversation, I'm realizing a huge part of what she means is that she feels crafty because whenever you are playing a low agency game and make happen what you want to happen, you were crafty, right? You used the tools that you had available, which weren't perfect for this situation, to bring about the thing you wanted to have happen. And I think trick-taking games are really good at that. Here's a hand of crap tools. You say, I'm going to do this. And then when you do it, you feel amazing. It's like you fixed the toilet with gum, toothpick, and an old wristwatch. You feel really crafty.
Well, I think two modern games I think of that do this really well. Jake, I know one of your favorites is Nokosu Dice. And I think when I first played it with you, I think I told you, like, what makes this game so great is when you hit your bid, it feels like you just did a magic trick.
Yeah.
Because, like I made the numbers match. Like, I did it. Against all odds, I did it. And so I think it can make you feel really good because it feels like you're pulling off something impossible. And then I think one of the most successful modern games in this genre is Cat in the Box. Have you guys played Cat in the Box?
I haven't.
So the thing about Cat in the Box is your cards don't have suits. And so when you play a card, you say what suit it is. But they make you bid first. And so it's this game where like your cards are anything you want. Like the whole game is hit your bid. And you get to like break all the rules of a card game in the service of hitting your bid. So it's like, oh, I don't have any blue cards. That sucks. Why did I say that? Because like I need to win 3 tricks. And so here's a way for me to get tricks right now. But you're also just constantly like, kicking your own butt by like waning your own decision space around trying to hit this bid.
I think great examples. Nokosu Dice is definitely my favorite trick-taking game. I played it just at a recent game night and after doing the top 10 episode. So I was almost a little bit worried. Like,
oh, no.
So I have like a little bit of like hipsterish tendencies. And this is like a very like hot,
shocked.
curated, small print run game.
Hard to find.
Hard to find. Yeah.
Fan only. Yeah.
So, anyway, I just had the best time playing it. And I think too, like, not only does it have that like magic trick and just feeling so fun when you do hit your bid, it might actually be easier to hit your bid than in a lot of other games, because once you kind of know what's happening, you have so much more agency than you do in a lot of other games, because you're manipulating what your bid is over the course of play in a really like organic and fun way. So I feel like it just like knocks it out of the park on that count too. Like if we're saying like trick taking games can be really fun when you've got a slight rule set and still feel like you have a lot of agency, like Nokosu Dice, you have a lot of agency, I feel.
Well, and that makes me think of one of my favorite newer games, which is not out in America yet, but it's going to come out in America. It's being published here pretty soon. It's called Boast or Nothing. I think it's Korean. And in that one, you don't have a bid, but everyone is trying to win either 0 tricks or 2 tricks. Okay, so there's no bid, but everyone has given the same bid, basically. And so usually when I play a hand of Boast or Nothing, I'm trying to win 0. And then when I accidentally win 1, I'm like, okay, I guess I'm winning 2. Like, like...
That happens in Nokosu too, where it's right, like, yeah. I think like my bid's going to be 2 here. And then maybe like you're forced to use your 2 dice. Yeah. And you're like, well, let's go for 3 or 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. I really like what you're saying too about feeling crafty in trick-taking games, Brendan, because like that feels a little bit like life in some ways, right? Where, if you want to achieve something or, get some kind of like policy passed at your work or something, like we don't always have all the tools to just get it done. Like you have to be a little bit creative and sneaky and pull the levers you have and try and get done. So I like that a lot too. Trick taking games are just like life.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that play the cards you're dealt is common vernacular, right? I
Right.
think, yeah. Can we talk about, so there's a couple other elements that I want to hit on before we talk about maybe some of the games that we really love, or as we sort of continue to explore these what set trick taking games apart. And something I really like in trick taking games is the mechanic of passing cards. So not all trick taking games have this mechanic, but some trick taking games either at the start of a round, maybe in a partnership game, you get to send 1 or 2 or 3 cards to your partner. And by a partnership game, I mean that it's maybe a table of 4 players playing the one game, and there's 2 people on a team, and they're trying to work together. So they have to try to understand what's in the other player's hand. And sometimes you can pass at the start cards. And by doing that, you are giving information maybe about what you're strong in or weak in to the other person. But then there's
though?
You are. Sometimes that's the whole game. Jake, you have to
How would I know?
you have to speak in whispers.
Just want to push back here because, like, how could I know? You hand me a card. How could I know if you're strong or weak in that?
All right, great. So when it comes to passing cards, if I'm passing cards with a partner,
Yeah,
I'm trying to communicate something.
right. I get that you're trying to.
So, okay, here's a great example. Have you played? There's a modern game. It's on Board Game Arena. It's called Yokai Septet.
I have.
And
This
that's
is
a partnership.
exactly when I was
Great.
so
Let's talk.
confused.
Okay, so Yokai Septet, first of all, is absolutely brilliant. It's a brilliant game. It's got 7 suits, and the only number that every suit has is the number 7. And the goal in the game is to capture 7s. So you don't want to win tricks that don't have 7s in them, but you want to capture 4 7s. Okay. And so when I'm passing with my partner in that game, I'm doing one of 2 things. One, I might just give them whatever 7s I have. That way, my partner and I both know where those 7s are, right? Like, I know he's got the blue 7. He knows he's got the blue 7. And so there's that sharing of information. Or I'll give my partner the highest card in a suit that I have the 7 in. So I'm essentially, if I give you the high card in a suit, I'm saying lead with this card. Now, this requires us to say that. It requires that language. So another great modern game that does this is Sail. Sail is an all-play game that's a 2-player cooperative trick-taking game where you're sailing a ship cooperatively by trading who wins tricks. And you have to play the cards in a very specific way, so the passing of the cards is everything. If I'm just like passing to the right in a game like Hearts, I'm not trying to communicate anything. I'm just trying to craft my hand in a way that I'm either short-suited or in a way that I'm going to win a particular trick I want to win.
And that comes up in other sort of modern games like Jekyll versus Hyde, this head-to-head 2-player only trick-taking game, in which one player is trying to win lots of tricks and one player is trying to lose lots of tricks, in which there are these potion cards that are suitless cards that you can play, and depending on the suit that they are played against, have different powers. One of the powers that you can activate is card passing, and those make for these really exciting moments where you can set up hands where you can pass either all winning or losing cards to the other player. So if you fall behind and sort of hang on to your potions, you can have one of those moments where you feel incredibly crafty because you took all these different considerations into play and passed your opponent some real stinkers that then they look down and they're like, oh. But then, the exciting moment of then the other person gets to play a potion back and then you pass the same cards back. I've had that happen a few times. Very fun. If neither of you have played Jekyll versus Hyde, strongly recommend. It's on BJ. It's an excellent trick-taking game that even works asynchronously, and not a lot of trick-taking games work well asynchronously on BJ. But because of its 2-player nature, I find it works fairly well.
It is my favorite 2-player trick-taking game. Yeah.
I think maybe I'll come around to passing cards in trick-taking games at some point, because I think originally when I was starting to get into trick-taking games, I was like, yeah, they're cool, but I don't like bidding so much. It makes it hard to get into. And now I'm like, I like that, but I don't like passing cards. So I feel like that's like almost like an even more like hard gamer element to exist in a trick-taking game, because it does require that shared language to such a high extent, or even like explicit communication ahead of time, which I guess has its place, absolutely, but it's not something that I really favor at this point in trick taking games.
Maybe we could talk about special powers, because I've pivoted us from talking about, I mentioned these potion cards and a modern innovation. Spades doesn't have cards with special powers, right? There's the trump suit, which sort of says, I'm special. I'm a spade. I always win. But I think the sort of modern hobby trick taking games that got published, this riff on the genre is this idea of special powers being associated with some of the cards. So I've seen this in games like Jekyll versus Hyde, which I just mentioned, where each suit has some unique characteristic that really matters. You have to think about when you can activate the power of it by playing one of those potions. The Fox in the Forest is a really cool 2-player trick-taking game that uses special powers to make a 2-player trick-taking game not feel too stale. It's one of the tools that it has, because oftentimes in a 2-player trick-taking game, you can learn a ton about the other player's hand because you know what's in your own hand, which gives you a great sense for what is in theirs. Whereas in a 4-player trick-taking game, there's more uncertainty. But in the Fox in the Forest, odd value cards have these different powers associated with them that can meaningfully change the state and keep you in the game, even if it feels like you're losing, which I would say is a potential downside of trick-taking games. Also, is there's no real strong comeback mechanism mid-round, potentially. You can get on a ride that there's no way off of besides the loser door.
Which is why the shortness of the hands typically helps.
Is great.
But yeah, I think that this is a trend that we're going to keep seeing. It's easy to make a twist as to like, we'll do some cards that do weird stuff. Like, I think this is one of the big things about Skull King, where Skull King has those white flag cards where it's like, I can't win a trick with this card. It doesn't do anything else. It just loses. And then it's got the like rock, paper, scissors thing at the top with the Skull King, the pirates, the mermaid. And most of the cards are just net standard cards. But there's those couple of things that were like, if this is going to pop up, it's going to create an exciting moment.
Yeah.
And it's only going to happen like once or not at all.
Yeah. The first time I saw the card, that was just like, this trick is over. Like, set
Yeah,
those
the whale
cards
or whatever.
aside.
Yeah.
And we're starting a new one. It's like, wait, what do you mean? Like,
there's a
I
really
needed
fun
that.
one that's coming out from Bezier called Rebel Princess. I think they're localizing it this summer, and it is literally just hearts with special powers. Like, that's the whole game. It is hearts with special powers. The theme is great. You're princesses who are rebels and don't want princes to marry them, and the suit you're trying to dodge is the prince suit. Like, you don't want proposals
Cute.
from the princes. And then in hearts, the Queen of Spades is the worst card to take. And there's an animal suit. And in the animal suit, there's the frog. And the frog is the card you don't want to take because the frog is a prince. But the whole game is, each game, you're playing hearts, but you are a princess. And your princess has a special power you can use once per hand. And so you're playing a game that everyone has played. Most people have played hearts. But it's like, yeah, we're playing hearts, but like, I'm Cinderella. So I can say the clock just struck midnight, and so 12s are now the lowest card in
Nice.
the game, or whatever, right?
So
And
it's
it
even a
really,
special power independent of the cards you're playing. Just you are
correct.
Cinderella. Very cool.
Yes.
And they're
Yeah.
asymmetric player powers too, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yes. And so, I think that for people who want just like, no, I want the like pure thinky experience of like solving a puzzle, then there's trick taking games for that. But if you're like, no, I want to like laugh at the table, I think that the special power cards create those big, unpredictable, sort of like wild moments that are going to hit for different people.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the theme can go a long way to, yeah, like at least preparing your players for like the type of experience that you're getting into, or I should say like theme and presentation. Like when you play Skull King, as soon as you do your first bid, you're like, oh, it's like that,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
great.
it is.
I love Skull King.
These it's obviously, trick taking is an inherently themeless thing, right? It is very abstract, but it
It
has
is
been
your
so
standard
awesome,
deck of cards
right?
game.
But it's been so awesome to see these modern games that somehow integrate theme into a trick taking game without really changing the rules of what you're doing that much. Like Jekyll versus Hyde being a great example.
Yeah, totally. One thing that's so cool about trick taking games, and this is just like a random stray thought, is that if and going back to sort of like the history of these games, and these are just like, played with like a standard deck of cards, is that they feel so similar to like the modern board games that we play in a way. Like it feels like you're playing like a almost like a board game that has like a set unit of like time and like expectation, like rounds, in a way that's like really different from poker, like the other thing that we associate with a standard deck of cards. Like poker feels so much less board gamey to me in that, you're usually like it's indefinite, you just play forever, you're playing with money, you're doing like player elimination and all that stuff. That feels so much further from kind of like the modern board game hobby, which brings me back to the start about how like these games are familiar to folks sort of like in our hobby and outside of it.
Well, and I think what's really exciting is I think we're starting to see it being used as a mechanism in a larger game.
Right.
Like rather than just playing a trick-taking game, they'll add a trick-taking mechanism. Like I'm very excited about arcs coming out, which is not surprising. I'm like a Cole
That's
Wehrle
crazy.
fan.
Yeah.
I know, right? Can you believe it? I'm a Cole Wehrle fanboy, but it's an area control game where trick-taking is just the action selection mechanism, right? And so I think that's really cool to say like, oh, trick taking is this neat narrowing decision, right? Sort of like if you're playing Castles of Burgundy and your decision options are narrowed by what your dice are, right? This is like, well, what if we narrow your decisions in a different way, right? What if you have a hand of cards, you know they're going to be played in a particular way because you know how these games work, but that is used in the service of something greater. So I'm just excited to see more of these like uses of what makes this decision space interesting, and then how can we use that in the service of something even bigger.
I'll say I'm like cautiously excited about Arc, but I wanted to shout out Brian Boru as a game that feels like a trick taking game and board game almost in equal weight.
It's a Euro.
Right. I'll be interested to see kind of how the balance of things go in arcs, because that would be my concern, that the game feels like either the trick taking aspect is like too complicated and complex to like feel like I'm making like meaningful decisions in the other part of the game, or like vice versa. It feels like a tough needle to thread, and I think Brian Boru is like a kind of hits the sweet spot for me. Not that there could be other sweet spots, or a different game, different mechanic could work with a different weight to it for sure. Not writing it off.
I think one of the things that I love most about trick-taking games that I wonder, there's room for all games. I'm excited about arcs, and I don't even know when I'll get to play it. But
You haven't played Nokosu Dice yet.
I haven't even played Nokosu Dice yet. But one of the things that I did just buy Haggis and Trick Takers. But one of the things that I love about trick-taking games is that they give you a system that you can poke and prod at and get feedback on really quickly, right? It's the repetitive testing of a theory that gives me immediate feedback. That's really fun. Like the breezy, let's try it again, right? This sort of like, it reminds me of practicing baseball or something growing up, where I'll just like do a drill over and over and over again, and you can feel yourself getting better. I think trick-taking games give you that room, and I wonder how that will sort of adapt. And I think to these sort of larger game settings where pacing and flow for me is also a huge part of trick-taking games. There's a really good card games. Part of the magic circle that they create is a rhythm of cards played on the table that you're all sort of vibing at, and you're playing at the same pace, where you've made this tacit agreement about like, this is the speed we're playing our cards. I know you could puzzle this out more, but like, this is roughly the speed we're all going to play. And there's times where that's not true, right? There's competitive settings or whatever. But I think that part of the reason I love card games is getting in that flow together, and trick-taking games do that as well as any card games I've ever played.
And sometimes it's not even a magic circle. It's just like I have no choice. So like that force, so that like forces me to play quickly in a way. And I say that not as a criticism, but as like a big benefit of the game. Like one thing I've heard you say before, P, that I really agree with is like it's nice to have trick taking as part of a game night, because it like enables a more social game experience. And that, I mean, that might not always be the case with every single trick taking game, but like generally we're talking about games that are quicker to play, good flow, relatively light. So people can, take in what's happening and also engage with each other on a social level that like heavier and thinkier games and maybe games that are more stuttering to play don't always allow for.
Yeah, this is really, I think, what has made this genre of games hit for me so well is I find it to be the most social game nights I have are these card game nights. Because I think that if I'm playing like a Euro game with friends, and it's like a heavier Euro game, like we're going to have fun, but ultimately I am more there to engage with the puzzle of the game than to socialize, which it can be a struggle if not everyone at the table is on the same page. But to a certain extent, it's like, yes, we're all engaged in the same puzzle, but like we're here for the puzzle, right? But when I'm sitting around playing card games with friends, like our personalities are what makes it fun. There's time to chit chat while you're shuffling and dealing, and there's trash talking, and there's like kind of moments, and people can be sneaky or people can be more bombastic. And I think that the personalities at the table matter so much when you're playing these games. And I feel like I get to know the people I'm playing a trick taking game with. Whereas if I were to sit down and like play Terra Mystica with somebody, I wouldn't necessarily get to know them as much. But like if I sit down and play Spades with someone and someone is my partner, like we have bonded by the end of that game.
Yeah, or if we play like crew together, you'll like know at the end of the game Jake is an idiot.
Yeah.
In a way that like you wouldn't know if we played Castles of Burgundy.
Exactly.
But no, I think that's such a great point. And like going back to kind of where we started, right? Like when I got into this hobby, trick taking games, I was not looking for them like explicitly, but like I remember like the whole reason I got into this hobby like in such a big way was because like as a I don't like a 25-year-old guy, when I did my first game night with friends, it felt like I was hanging out with friends in a way that I hadn't for years. Like so much socializing at the time, like going out to bars, like yelling over loud music or just, drinking, and watching a game, like whatever. And it felt like the first time we got together and like played a game, like I was like, oh my God, like I really like these people. Like some of my friends are like really funny. And we weren't playing complicated games. We were playing Ticket to Ride and The Resistance, and that was the sort of like level of game that was, creating this experience that I've like come to, cherish and seek out on a weekly basis. And I think, getting more into trick taking games, having these be more a part of my game nights has sort of like rekindled that aspect. Which I think maybe I lost a little bit, sort of in the search for like the next great, midweight Euro game.
Nice. Maybe as we move towards closing the episode, everyone could give their closing thoughts on trick-taking games and one game that you recommend, whether it's a popular trick-taking game that people have heard of, or Jake, if you want to pull out some sort of hipsterism, or Pete, if you would like to as well.
I think I'm the
I
real
think that's
hipster
more
in this
than
space,
welcome.
but
I'm getting
gonna try to-
secondhand hipster from Pete.
I'm going to make a recommendation to try to impress Pete with my depth of knowledge. So we'll see if I can do it.
Excellent.
Do you want,
Yeah, I'll go and start. Yeah, this has obviously become an absolute obsession of mine, these games. I now am like designing games in this genre. Like this has kind of taken over my hobby of board gaming. I think the one I would recommend is a new release in America, which Brendan mentioned that he just got, and it's called Trick Takers. And this is just the wackiest, weirdest trick taking game where every player has totally asymmetric powers with their own incentive structure and abilities. And it is kind of like every idea from every trick taking game crammed into one wild game. And if you're okay with games being a little goofy and a little wild, I think it's one of the most rewarding trick taking games you can play. Like one person is playing the crew and they're giving everyone else missions to achieve. And like if they don't achieve their missions, they lose points. And so we're trying to help each other achieve their missions. One person has to bid. One person is trying to lose tricks. Everyone's got these wild, weird things they can do. And it's just, I think, super sharp. And so my recommendation is if you think you've seen everything these games can do, and you're like, I've played a trick taking game, I get it. I would check this one out because it is really just the most ideas crammed into a box. I think it's got a 40-page rule book. Right. It's a trick taking game with a 40-page rule book. So like if that means anything to you, I would recommend, if that sounds exciting to you, I'd recommend Trick Takers.
awesome. And I've sort of already talked about, my thoughts on trick taking in general. So I'll just jump in with my recommendation, which is I'm not going to say Nokosu Dice. People know that's my favorite one. I really love it. But another one I'd recommend is another one Pete showed me, which is Schadenfreude. And so what I love about Nokosu Dice is that it leans so much into one kind of cool aspect of trick taking games, which is like they can be games that enable agency for players. So like if Nokosu Dice is like the superpower agency trick taking game, then Schadenfreude leans into another thing we've talked about in trick taking games, which is like the ability to do Kingmaking in like a fun and satisfying way. And like that's the superpower in Schadenfreude. Where in this game, you're trying to be in second place at the end of the game, and the game end triggers once somebody goes past the end of the score track. They lose. Whoever's in second at that point wins the game. So, it has like this super interesting like double think of like you're trying to get points because you have to have a lot of points to win. You're also trying to like collude with other players to knock somebody off the track. And trying to pull it off together. I've only played it once. I think I was the one who fell off, but I just had an awesome time, like, kind of performing that king making aspect of a trick taking game. And I can't wait for my next play of it.
And I'll just mention, so I offhandedly just mentioned Haggis as a game I bought, which is actually a climbing game, but it's designed by someone named Sean Ross. Who don't do it, Brendan?
Listen,
no, but
Haggis is my favorite card game.
I'm
like totally like 100%.
Haggis is another one of those games that when I first started really digesting sort of hobby game content, people would always mention, and it was sort of, I think it paved the way for the trick-taking games that would come to market as sort of hobby games of interest. But I mention it because Sean Ross, the designer of Haggis, has designed a trick-taking game that's on Board Game Arena. It's a web-published game. I don't think it exists in a physical version, but it's wonderful. It's a two-player trick-taking game.
All right, you're the biggest hipster or whatever. It's fun.
Vidrasso, Vidrasso, that has this neat mechanism of straw men. So you have these cards in front of you that each player can see that are a part of your hand, that makes it tactical and flowing in a way. If Spades can lock you into a lane and force you down it, like you're halfway through a shopping market lane and you have to just keep going to get to the end. Vidrasso, you can bounce all about and make interesting decisions where you're pivoting and turning, and it has some interesting bidding as well. It's one I really enjoy the sort of pacing of and the flow of, and I think it's a really great game.
Awesome. I've not played that one.
Yes.
Add it to the list.
Let's play it.
Yeah.
I also want to say, I guess, Pete, you can't mention any of the games you're working on now, probably yet.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay. Well, that's a shame, but okay. But you've got at least a couple of trick take games to be published.
Yes.
At some point. I think that's safe to say. And the one I've played quite a few times in different iterations, and like I have to say that's definitely up there for me as one of my favorite trick taking games.
Well, thank you
as well. And once it comes out,
we'll talk about it on the show.
We'll talk about it, yeah, and it'll be awesome.
Great, I'll come back.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm sure Pete will be happy to share news in our Discord when it comes.
For sure.
I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode on trick-taking mechanisms. Pete, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This is a dream.
Chatting with us. Yeah, it was a total blast.
You can find more things Decision Space, including past What We Talk About episodes like this one, our deep dives, and more on decisionspacepodcast.com, where you can also find a link to our Patreon. Thank you to all the patrons who we have who graciously support the show and get cool benefits like seeing our faces in a video form of this podcast that releases before the actual episodes. So you can hear Decision Space before anyone else, access to show notes, and also just access to a special channel in our Discord where you can talk with other patrons. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're coming to Geekway, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks as always to Hembry for intro and outro music. Reach out. Bye, y'all.
Bye.